It was a humid summer evening in the small town of Willow Creek, and 16-year-old Emily Carter had just finished her shift at the local diner. The smell of grease and coffee still clung to her uniform as she stepped out into the warm night, pulling her long blonde hair into a loose ponytail. The town was quiet at this hour, the streets empty save for the occasional parked car and the flickering glow of neon signs. The walk home wasn't long, but it always felt a little eerie at night. The trees along the road loomed tall and shadowy, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. The cicadas hummed their endless tune, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked before falling silent again. Emily wasn't scared. She had walked this path dozens of times, but something about tonight felt different. She glanced up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter than usual, their glow unusually sharp against the velvety darkness. She had always loved looking at the stars, imagining what lay beyond them. But tonight their light felt almost unnatural, too precise, as if they weren't just shining, but watching. As she continued down the road, a faint buzzing noise pricked at the edge of her hearing. It was distant, almost imperceptible, like the low hum of power lines. She stopped walking for a moment, tilting her head. The sound faded. Shrugging it off, she kept moving, though now her steps were a little quicker. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, colder than the summer air should have allowed. The cicadas stopped. The night fell into an unnatural silence. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. The road ahead stretched into darkness, but something, some instinct, told her not to look back. Her fingers clenched around the strap of her bag as she forced herself to keep walking, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then the light came. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't distant. It was instant and blinding, a white-hot explosion of brilliance that swallowed the night whole. The world around her vanished. There was no ground, no sky, no trees, just an endless field of white that consumed everything, including her. Emily tried to scream, but no sound came. Her body refused to move. Weightless, frozen, she felt herself being pulled upward, the warmth of the summer air replaced by an icy void. The stars above, once distant and mysterious, now felt impossibly close, as if she were being drawn toward them. Her last thought before the darkness took her was a desperate, terrified question. Am I dying? And then, nothing. Emily's consciousness drifted between the darkness and a strange, pulsing light. Awareness returned in slow waves, the feeling of weight pressing into her back as if she were floating just above a surface but not quite resting on it. Her breath was shallow, coming in short, ragged gasps, her lungs burning as if she had been holding it for too long. She forced her eyes open. The ceiling above her was impossibly smooth, not made of plaster or metal but something else. Something that shimmered like liquid silver yet remained solid. Strange, glowing veins of light pulsed through it in irregular patterns, shifting between soft blue and iridescent violet. The room stretched far beyond what her eyes could comprehend, its boundaries distorted, shifting as if not entirely tethered to reality. Emily's fingers twitched. The surface beneath her was cool, yet it adjusted to her touch, firm and unyielding one moment, slightly soft the next, like memory foam that responded to her movements before settling again. The air smelled sterile, tinged with something faintly electric like the sharp scent of ozone after a lightning strike. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, fast and unsteady, her chest rising and falling in panicked gasps. She willed herself to sit up, every muscle sluggish, heavy, as though gravity itself was different here. That was when she noticed the silence. No hum of an air conditioner. No distant sounds of life. No breathing other than her own. A shiver crawled up her spine. She wasn't alone. Emily turned her head sharply at the movement in her peripheral vision. A shadow stretched against the strange, glowing walls. It wasn't human. The figures stood motionless, observing her. Their bodies were impossibly tall and slender, their limbs elongated, tapering into delicate, graceful fingers. Their skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, smooth and devoid of any imperfections. Their heads were elongated, their skulls curving back slightly in a way that was unsettlingly unnatural. But it was their eyes that locked her in place. Large, black, and depthless, yet shimmering with hints of violet and blue like galaxies trapped within. Her breath caught in her throat. The moment stretched, silent, tense, her muscles coiled, instinct screaming at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room had no doors, no windows, only the shifting, pulsing light and the watching figures. Then, the pressure came. Not a sound, not a voice, but something pressing against her mind. A presence. Not one, but many, their thoughts slipping into her consciousness like tendrils of mist. A sensation so foreign, so intimate, that it sent a shock through her body.
Do not be afraid.
The words bloomed inside her skull, not heard but felt, reverberating through her very bones. It was not a command, nor a demand. It was reassurance. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the beings before her. The fear clawing at her throat demanded she scream, but something deeper, a primal, unexplainable instinct, kept her silent. They were not threatening her, but they were studying her. She shifted backward, her hands pressing against the cool, unearthly surface beneath her. The material gave slightly, as if responding to her touch, yet she remained trapped. The room pulsed again, the glowing veins of light shifting to a softer hue, no longer the icy blue of sterility, but a warmer lavender, almost soothing. Emily licked her dry lips, forcing her voice to work despite the terror constricting her chest. "What do you want?" The figures did not move, but the answer came immediately.
Understanding. You are here to learn.
A fresh wave of panic surged through her. The words felt vast, carrying weight beyond their meaning. Her mind scrambled for understanding, for something tangible to hold on to, but nothing made sense. "I want to go home," she whispered, her voice breaking. A pause. Then the pressure in her mind shifted, warmer, curious, almost patient.
In time.
The words sent a chill through her. Not ready? Ready for what? The fear inside her twisted, morphing into something else. A horrible realization clawed at the edges of her mind. She wasn't being returned. She was being kept. The next days, or what she assumed were days, blurred together, each moment slipping between her fingers like sand. Emily had no way of measuring time. The glowing walls never dimmed, never brightened. Sleep came in restless fragments, interrupted by the overwhelming presence of the beings who monitored her every move. They did not speak aloud. They did not eat. They did not breathe. But they watched, and they tested. The first trial was disorienting. Emily had been in her chamber when the walls melted away, dissolving like mist, and suddenly She was standing in a vast, endless desert. The heat scorched her skin. The sun, was it a sun? Blazing white overhead. She turned in every direction, but there was nothing but golden dunes stretching for miles. Then, the whispers began. Faint at first, curling around her consciousness like smoke. They did not belong to the beings. These voices were old, fragmented, pieces of something lost. They whispered of thirst, of hunger, of madness that came from endless wandering. Emily squeezed her hands over her ears. Stop it! But they did not stop. The second trial came without warning. The desert was gone. She was in water. Deep, dark, endless. The weight of the ocean pressed against her chest, and she realized with horror that she was sinking. Emily kicked desperately, but there was no surface. No sky. No light. Just a vast, crushing abyss that swallowed her whole. Her lungs burned. Her mind screamed. Then, in the darkness, eyes opened. Thousands of them, glowing softly in the abyss, watching, waiting. Something brushed against her leg. She screamed, and then it was gone. She was back in her chamber, curled on the floor, gasping for breath. The beings observed her, their heads tilting slightly.
Adapt. Learn. Overcome.
The trials continued. She was placed in endless environments. Cold, hot, suffocating, desolate. The illusions were so perfect that she could not tell if they were real. Each experience tested her will, her endurance, her ability to think under impossible pressure. And through it all, the beings never intervened. They only watched. Her body changed. Or perhaps it didn't. Perhaps it was only her mind that evolved. She could feel their presence before they entered a room. She could hear thoughts before they were spoken. And she could see, truly see, the intricate patterns of energy that made up all things. Time itself was no longer linear, but an ever-shifting current she could almost reach out and touch. She was becoming something more than human. She spent what felt like years learning from them. They took her to the edges of the known universe, not through physical travel, but by expanding her mind to perceive realities beyond her own. She witnessed the birth of stars, felt the ancient hum of cosmic forces as they twisted and turned, shaping galaxies. The beings, whom she began to call the elders, showed her the threads that wove together the fabric of existence. They taught her to manipulate the very essence of life, bending light and space with nothing more than thought. It wasn't magic. It was understanding. It was knowing the secrets that humans had yet to comprehend. She was tested, placed into simulations where she had to solve impossible problems. She experienced entire lifetimes within these dreamlike constructs, only to wake and find mere minutes had passed. They stretched her consciousness, expanded her reality until she no longer felt bound by the limitations of earthly logic. Yet even as she learned, she longed for home. The thought of her family, of Willow Creek, remained like an anchor in her soul, a tether that the aliens could not sever. They showed her Earth from their vantage point, a blue jewel spinning in the vastness of space, so small, so fragile. They asked her, without words, if she was ready to leave it behind. She wasn't. When it finally happened, it was not a ceremony. There were no farewells, no explanations. Just a moment of silence before the change. Emily had been staring out at the vastness of the void, her thoughts tangled between longing and fear, when the walls of her chamber seemed to ripple. A feeling settled in her chest, a deep cosmic certainty that something had shifted. She turned, expecting to see one of the elders observing her, but instead, she felt a sensation she had not experienced in years. Gravity. The weight of her own body pressed against her limbs, her feet suddenly grounded. The strange, floating existence she had grown accustomed to was gone. Panic gripped her as she realized what was happening. The walls brightened into an unbearable white light, a radiance that swallowed her whole. And then, she was falling. She tumbled downward, her breath ripped from her lungs as the force of reality took hold. Wind screamed in her ears, her vision blurred. For one horrifying second, she thought she would crash into the earth, shattering upon impact. But then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. Emily found herself standing in the middle of a quiet road. The heat of a summer night wrapped around her skin. The soft hum of distant crickets reached her ears. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, the familiar scent of home. It was the exact moment she had left. Nothing had changed, except everything had. Her heart pounded as she turned toward the soft glow of the porch light in the distance. Her house. Her mind screamed that it was impossible, but her body moved forward, drawn by a force greater than logic. She stumbled onto the porch and knocked. The door creaked open. Her mother stood there, but she was older. Streaks of gray ran through her hair, her once youthful face lined with years that Emily had not lived. A gasp broke from her mother's lips, her hand flying to her mouth. Behind her, Emily's father appeared, his once broad shoulders now slightly hunched with age. And then, a third figure. A man Emily barely recognized, though something in his eyes told her she should. Her little brother, all grown up. The world tilted. Emily's mother let out a strangled sob. "Oh my God!" The scream that followed shattered the stillness of the night. Emily Carter had been gone for 20 years, yet she had not aged a single day. The days that followed were chaos. The authorities were called. News stations swarmed the house. Government. Officials arrived in black SUVs. She was questioned for hours, then days. Every part of her was examined. Blood tests, brain scans, even DNA verification. The results only confirmed the impossible. She was still 16, biologically, mentally, in every conceivable way. And yet 20 years had passed. She struggled to process it. Her parents, once in their prime, were now aging. Her brother was an adult with a family of his own. Friends she had once laughed with were now strangers, their youthful faces replaced by time's inevitable hand. The world had changed. New technology, new slang, new rules. She was an artifact of a life frozen. In time, and worse, she could still feel them, the elders. Their presence lingered in the back of her mind, a phantom weight she could not shake. At night, when she closed her eyes, she saw the shifting lights of their world. She felt their silent observation, their endless patience. She wasn't sure if they had truly let her go, or if they were merely waiting. The worst part was that she missed it. The ship, the void, the knowledge they had given her. Earth felt slow, heavy. The colors duller, the sounds muted. Conversations were filled with meaningless words. She tried to act normal, to pretend that she belonged, but the truth pressed against her like an invisible force. She no longer belonged here. One evening, she sat in her old bedroom, staring at the familiar posters on the walls, the faded photographs, of friends who had moved on. She reached for a pen and let it hover over the journal she had been given. She had nothing to write. A month passed. Then 2. She spoke to therapists who whispered terms like trauma and delusion when they thought she wasn't listening. She was placed under observation, watched by doctors who tried to explain her condition through science. But science had no answers. She felt the pull growing stronger. The stars called to her in dreams, whispering through the fabric of reality. She caught glimpses of lights hovering at the edges of her vision, vanishing when she turned to look. The night sky no longer seemed distant. It felt like a doorway, slightly ajar. Then, one night, as she stood in the backyard, barefoot in the cool grass, she saw it. A shimmer in the sky. A presence. She knew what it meant. Her breath shuddered as she closed her eyes, feeling the silent invitation settle in her bones. She had tried to be human again. She had tried to live in a world that had left her behind. But she was no longer Emily Carter, the girl from Willow Creek. She was something more. And when the light came again, swallowing her in its radiance, she did not resist. She had never truly returned.
If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to my page and then wait for the next. Comments are always welcome to let me know what you liked and didn't like about the story.